question why I'm smiling. You buy a piece of paradise, you buy a piece of me.
G'day, welcome to the show. My name's MAYO, I'm your host. This is NetGazzette TV. Welcome to all those returning, and welcome to anyone who is watching the show for the first time. Don't forget to check us out on social media, Google+, Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest. We're on just about all of them. Best way to contact us obviously is via our website. You'll find that at www.netgazette.com.au or www.netgazette.com. Via email, info@netgazette.com.au, just for general inquiries. And specifically, if you've got something to say to me personally, you can use mick@netgazette.com.au. Alright, got a bumper show lined up. Obviously we've had what appears to be another false flag in France, so we'll be taking a bit of a look at that. It's a little too early though to investigate the false flag element of it. However, we'll stay across the backs and keep you guys up to speed as we have a look at it. The episode is going to centre around SAS RA4. It is the Special Service Regiment commissioned by John Howard just after the 9/11 false flag. These guys are involved in all sorts of stuff, mostly manipulating foreign sovereign nations and governments, and playing war games in countries where we don't belong. They're basically the Australian version of the American CIA. From what I gather and from information that we've been able to get a hold of, they are largely trained by the CIA. And it is yet another example of where John Howard, through these innocuous treaties, has basically given the Americans free for all insofar as how they conduct operations within this country. Obviously the POMs are in on it too. The Five Eyes nations, including New Zealand and Australia, from what I can gather anyway, are basically, as usual, the test bed and like the hairy cousins from down south that you don't really talk to except when you have to. The only reason that we've been included in their Five Eyes little group is due to geographic location. Their shit won't work without us, basically. That puts us in a unique position moving forward. And anyone with an ear and an intellect would see where I would be going with that one. Alright, so as I say, we're going to take a good look at SAS 4th Squadron and their base of operations, being a little known training ground called Swan Island in Victoria. This place has received very little in the way of media attention. Well, aside from one story that I can find, it's received no media attention. Not that we would expect that to be any different. So as I say, they're involved in all sorts of things around the world, but primarily they're conducting a secret war in South Africa and those regions around there. Obviously the 4th Squadron, in my opinion, represents the fact that we are the Region 4 in the in the New World Order, and these guys will be basically the chaps that will be implementing the next stage of the world order in Australia and in those regions where Australia will be governing. So basically ISIS are also present on the training base. Now they're the mob that, for anyone that can remember back to the botched wet job in a Melbourne hotel many years ago, where the staff and basically citizens were lucky not to be shot, and then in turn these idiot ISIS agents were lucky that they weren't shot by police attending the scene. These guys are running around with hoods on, no identification, and submachine guns. So they didn't even bother to notify the hotel staff. So after that, I can't remember now which Prime Minister it was. It wasn't Howard, it was the one before. Howard basically took the guns off them and gave them a good rap over the knuckles. Delegated them to an office or an administrative role within the intelligence services. Of course, then little Pipsqueak came on the scene. He undid everything that the previous governments had accomplished. He was also central in the gun grab here in Australia, whereby Howard and his cronies organised for SAS troopers to murder 26 odd citizens in Port Arthur on Tasmania, on the island of Tasmania. That was in 1996. That was prior to 9/11. Basically, Howard's over there right now as we speak, informing your guys as to the best way forward insofar as pulling a false flag and then turning it around to get the vote of to get the sympathy of the moderate middle class, who luckily for us are slowly but surely waking from their slumber, it would seem. And it looks like there may be some light at the end of the tunnel. We've got Donald Trump in America, who looks as though he may actually carry out some of the things that he's saying he is going to. Of course, you can never tell. These guys will say more or less anything to get themselves in the seat of power. Once there, of course, it's a different kettle of fish. Even if he is of good heart and isn't speaking with forked tongue, he'll find that there are many hurdles and many barriers placed in front of him if he intends to actually go against the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations and the World Banking cabal. He'll probably find himself much like old JFK. Of course, Howard was also involved in the creation of ONA, ONA, the Office of National Assessment, basically a body of spooks who operate above and beyond the Australian Constitution, let alone forget the law. These guys are basically acting with royal immunity, I'd call it. Howard, he lied about the Iraq War. Obviously, he was, him and Blair gave credence to Bush's bullshit and convinced the Western world that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and had actually used gas on the Kurds, none of which, of course, was true. Howard also expanded the American CIA footprint in Australia. Obviously, Pine Gap was expanded a great deal under Howard's prime ministership. He more or less, as I said earlier, gave the Americans carte blanche when it came to what they wanted to do. He's basically an NWO bitch that couldn't lie straight in bed. It's my opinion of John Howard, along with Tony Blair and George Bush, Senior and Junior, even going back to fucking Prescott. A little too late to get Prescott before a court of justice, but as for Bush 1 and 2 and Blair and Howard, there's plenty of time for them. And I firmly believe we will see a time when the elite are brought to justice and are made to honour the same set of protocols, laws and expectations that they lay down for us, the common citizen. So alright, we might cut the break there and then we'll get stuck into part one. We'll do some breaking news first when we come back, and then we'll take a bit of a look at this Swan Island. So once again, welcome to everyone that's joined the channel. Thank you very much for your support. It's needed. If we're to turn these things around here in Australia, then us Australians need to start having a voice as well. It's all good and well to let the likes of David Icke and Alex Jones take all the heat and push the agenda of the common folk. I think we as Australians and our nation, since it is playing a large part in many of the evils that are taking place around the world, we need to be a part of the solution too, guys. So step up, get over to the site and register if you haven't already. Please feel free to give us your opinion via the comments, and get involved with the social media aspects of the website. We've got the online store open now. Please check it out. We'll be adding more products to that as the weeks go by. But we have sourced a good quality Geiger counter. I highly recommend that everybody purchase one of those. If you care about what yourself, your family, your kids are consuming, then what harm can there be in laying out $100 for a good Geiger counter and waving it over the food you pull out of the freezer before you consume it. If it's all good, well, you know, nothing lost. I'm a firm believer in that it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Okay, so we'll also be adding some water filters to the range and some other environmental test equipment that we believe will be more and more important as we go forward. We'll also endeavour to add some survival gear there as well, along with the basics in safety equipment for the home and for out and about. All right, let's go to break. Once more, social media: Google+, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest. We're on all of them. We don't use them as a primary means of communication. However, we do post many of our stories and articles to those forums. We encourage everybody to distance themselves from the mainstream social media outlets: Facebook, Twitter, Google+, the like. These guys are basically in bed with the government and the security services, and will willingly hand up your guys' information whenever asked. We certainly will not. I do not keep any logs personally, except that which is necessary for the running of the framework of the social media elements of our website. Obviously there are some details that need to be kept. However, you will find that if you make a purchase or take out a membership with our site, the online store is a standalone application. So there is no link aside from a link in my head between your credit card information via our store's transaction history and your username on our website. in our forums, in our WordPress site. I will know the link, I will simply upgrade your account, and that will be the last I think about it. So in that way, I hope to assure everybody that your anonymity, whilst using our forums and our WordPress site in general, is insofar as I can assured. All right, cut the break. Okay, welcome back. All right, we're going to, I was going to do some breaking news, but there's nothing particularly pressing at the moment, so we'll do that when we, after we've had a look at this presentation I've got or have found on Swan Island. It's a mainstream report, done back when we actually had investigative reporters who weren't afraid to go out and do their jobs. All right, so let's, without further ado, let's have a look at it. Here goes. Alrighty, I'll get out the way.
You think you might, but you don't know this place. Several hundred metres behind me, past this sun-blighted scrub, trees and some brackish water, is a place that few people know about, and even fewer discuss. It's called the Swan Island Training Area, and though it's only 90 minutes south of Melbourne, it's home to one of the country's best kept secrets. It's a top secret counter-terrorism training ground, and in the last few years, it's been home to the men and women fighting Australia's quiet war. In 1964, the Special Air Service of the Australian Army was given regimental status and became the centre of the young country's special forces. Over the next 4 decades, the SAS kept a broadly uniform makeup. 3 Sabre, or fighting, squadrons, as well as some support staff. Then in 2005, in the aftermath of the Al-Qaeda attacks of September 11, the SAS raised another Sabre squadron and called it, simply, 4 Squadron.
If you want to deal with the Al-Qaedas of this world, you've got to have first-class operational and strategic intelligence. We learnt that from the failures to anticipate 9/11.
But despite the intervening 7 years, it's only today that its existence is being revealed. That's because during that time, 4 Squadron has undertaken some of the most clandestine and classified operations Australia has ever been involved in. Operations that exist in a murky world where the line between civilian spy and military soldier is becoming increasingly blurred.
You don't need the military to do all of this other intelligence stuff if you've got your intelligence agencies operating effectively. It's blurring the legal boundaries, it's blurring the accountability boundaries, and I think Australians would rightly ask questions as to why on earth our military forces are going about performing regular intelligence gathering functions, which exposes them to danger and puts Australia in a very difficult position in relation to other states if our forces are captured.
There's always the risk of overreach and the possibility of disaster, whether it's people being killed because of lack of poor planning or just because it's a difficult and dangerous business. Yes, the risk is always there. And the more you do these things, of course, the greater the risk that something's going to go wrong. On the other hand, what you do, if you're the minister or the Prime Minister or the government of the day and you've decided that you need vital intelligence that's not available by other means, you're going to have to do these kinds of things.
4 Squadron's main role is long-range intelligence gathering, often deep in enemy territory, with small teams of intelligence officers from Australia's Secret Service, ACES. Most of those operations have been conducted in Afghanistan and Iraq, some as joint missions with US Special Operations Forces and the CIA. But since at least last year, 4 Squadron has been carrying out an even more dangerous role in an even more uncertain part of the world. What the Australian public have not known until today, what Fairfax has been able to confirm, is that soldiers from the SAS's 4 Squadron have been operating on their own in a part of the world where Australia is not at war, Africa. But before that chapter can be told, so you yourself can decide whether this new role is appropriate or beyond the pale, the story must focus on a small hotel in downtown Melbourne. It was after a botched and uncomfortably public training exercise in 1983 here at what was then Melbourne's Sheraton Hotel that ACES had their guns taken away from them. 20 years later, in 2003, the Howard government suddenly announced that the spies were getting their guns back. The reason the Howard government made that decision was if ACES intelligence officers were to operate in concert with special forces and travel to the world's most dangerous places, they needed to be armed, if only for self-defence. But there was also a reason that for 20 years ACES had been denied the right to carry weapons.
The Sheraton event back in the 1983 was unfortunate for a number of reasons. One is it was an attempt by ACES and the military to put together an embryonic or prototype capability that we have today, but without either side really understanding what they were doing or having the skills to implement it.
They hadn't told the management they were going to do it. They hadn't told the police they were going to do it. Yet they were running around the hotel with silenced submachine guns, which they'd not even signed out from the Swan Island training area armoury, and they were going to snatch this guy from this hotel room. And they broke down the hotel door with a sledgehammer, all the rest of it. But they got caught more or less by the hotel staff, including the manager, and they brandished guns and got out. But they were incredibly lucky that the Victoria Police was on the way, and they could have been shot. And it was pretty hard to argue about the police shooting them because here are people waving submachine guns around and masks and so forth.
The incident at the Sheraton left a terrible taste in the mouths of Bob Hawke's new government. And soon after, the agency lost the right to use weapons or violence. But the spies were determined to create a capacity to blend their intelligence gathering talents with military tactics. If they were ever to get such a capacity back, its heart would be found 90 minutes south of Melbourne, at Swan Island. Though the island has long been a training ground for some of Australia's most secret operations, it wasn't until after 2001 that it became home to Australia's counter-terrorism effort. It was at the height of the Cold War in the late 1950s when ACES took the site over from the Navy. For the next 4 decades it was used as a proving ground for the agency's intelligence officers and for the military's special forces. Then came the Al-Qaeda attacks of 2001, and suddenly the site became the location for some of Australia's most clandestine counter-terrorism exercises. With this expanded role came a new building program, and today there are dozens of new buildings, many of them on the site's northern corner. If the Swan Island building boom was highly classified, what it represented was even more so. Since the middle of the 2000s, parts of Swan Island were used to help train the men and women of ACES and the SAS who became part of this new civilian military capability. And in order to command them, Australia's Special Operations Command, known as SOCOM, also increased its footprint on the island. Documents available on the Australian government's tender website reveal that Defence alone has paid private contractors more than $26 million as part of that building regime. And everything was in order to foster an increasingly symbiotic relationship between Australia's spies and its soldiers.
We were all blindsided by what happened by 911. No one anticipated it. We found that we didn't have the right structures, we didn't have the right skill sets among our intelligence people. For example, we didn't have enough Arabic speaking people. Certainly you couldn't deploy most of your intelligence officers into difficult and dangerous environments. That's not what they were trained for. So what do you do about that? Well, the answer is you do 2 things. You work more closely with the Special Air Services, in Australia's case, and you reskill your civilian intelligence officers so they can operate effectively in joint teams and in difficult, dangerous environments, but there have to be limits around that and boundaries around that.
It was in Iraq and Afghanistan that ACES and 4 Squadron cut their teeth. From tracking elements of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's group, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, to gleaning intelligence from insurgent sources in Afghanistan, the small teams worked hard, but completely off the radar. Even more so when they engaged in joint operations with the tip of America's Special Warfare Spear, the Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC.
The United States' close military allies, of which Australia is certainly one, have seen, firsthand the success that JSOC is having, at least at the tactical and operational levels. JSOC is more than just a collection of door kickers, of super commandos. It also has an extraordinarily robust intelligence sort of apparatus nested inside of it. The Australian militaries probably looked at that model and thought, how can we, if not replicate that, at least create something like that so that we have more complementary organizations to our core special mission units.
I think it's likely that it's an attempt to emulate the United States. Whether it's a good idea depends on whether you think what the United States has been doing is a good idea. I'm not really in a position to judge that. I just wouldn't take it for granted that just because the United States has been doing it, it's necessarily a good idea, or necessarily a good idea for Australia. I think you'd need to ask very searching questions about whether or not this particular form of intelligence collection capability is really a cost-effective way of achieving the intelligence objectives you're setting yourself. And when I say cost-effective, I don't mean just cost-effective in terms of the dollars, but the risks and the opportunity cost of distracting these valuable assets from other functions.
While it remains unclear exactly what prompted the decision of the Australian government and its military, what is certain is that from at least as early as last year, 4 squadrons started going on operations without the presence of ASIS intelligence officers. Most remarkably, perhaps most legally concerning, is the fact that they are now operating in African countries such as Nigeria, Kenya and Zimbabwe, all places where Australia is not at war and where we have no declared military presence.
If Australian forces are present in other countries, in circumstances where Australia is not fighting lawfully in an armed conflict, but they're just picked up as spies on the ground, that then exposes them to the full force and penalty of the local domestic law. Now, in many countries, espionage is an incredibly serious political offence which can carry the death penalty.
Terrorism has morphed in many ways, including and spread geographically. So Al-Qaeda affiliates are now most active in the Horn of Africa, and those affiliates are either directly or indirectly targeting Australian interests. So I think the decision's been made, if we ever go to these places again, we really want to have the best possible intelligence we have so we know what we're getting into. And I think those are the factors that are driving this newfound intelligence interest in the Horn of Africa and Africa more broadly.
It appears that even some of 4 Squadron's troopers have become frustrated that while they are doing the job of a spy, they're being exposed to far greater risk because they're denied the legal cover such civilian intelligence operators receive. Simply, they feel they are vulnerable because the legal world has not caught up with their newly evolved role. While they are convinced of the justness of their mission, they have foreseen the very real dangers they face in undertaking it.
Committing forces to military operations is not just another day in the office for a government, it's a very serious step to take. I think for a government to do that without informing the Australian public, at least in very broad terms, is a very serious step. Now again, I can perhaps imagine some very special, very extreme circumstances under which a government could responsibly decide that it had no option. I'm far from persuaded that the war on terror has so far provided that kind of occasion.
I mean, don't believe that just because we're a democracy somehow we'll do the right thing. We know that security agencies, particularly when they operate in the dark, have a tendency to overstep the legal powers they're given. And if you don't have the right kinds of scrutiny in place, the right kinds of accountability mechanisms, then those dangers are all the more real.
Okay, welcome back. So that's Swan Island, and a little bit of a rundown on RA4 and what they do. You heard from Professor DuPont there. He's one of the Australian experts, I guess you'd call him, on terrorism and counter-terrorism and all things like that. He advises our government, and from all reports, they take his advice fairly seriously. I've posted a article to the site mentioning, I should say, Professor DuPont's most recent article mentioning our new illustrious Prime Minister, Turnbull, and basically lets him know what he is and isn't doing correctly. So it's an interesting read for those of you who care. Just touching on, just finishing off on the Swan Island thing before we move on. Reflecting the very large budgetary expansion of both ASIS and the ADF Special Forces as a whole in the years following 2001, the Swan Island facilities have been greatly expanded in recent years. The Google Earth image that's shown on our site and also available online. I apologise for my mic's giving me all sorts of problems, but we'll bear with it. Where were we? Yeah, the Google Earth image that you guys will be able to access online is actually an outdated one. Google Earth appears to have removed a 2009 image and replaced it with an earlier 2005 image. However, we do have the 2009 aerial photo available on our website. I think I'll manage to get a shot of it up on the screen here shortly too. The Department of Planning and Community Development site is quite often a better place to go when you're looking for images of government land. Now, just to give you an idea of the way these secret services operate these days, basically on their own reconnaissance with little oversight, if any, and even faced with a senator and a Senate inquiry, arrogantly sit there and refuse to answer questions to the people who pay their wages. They like to constantly refer to the national security. So they quite often or continually fall back on the old it's national security and therefore can't be discussed routine, which I'm sorry, it just doesn't cut it for basic questions. I'll just read quickly through a couple of things. There's an article, I've posted the entire article to the site. There's an interesting section there on three SAS officers who were killed during a training operation on Swan Island. That was part of a parliamentary inquiry. Again, we didn't really establish any circumstances surrounding how they died, why they died, even exactly when they died. This is a short section. Mr. Malcolm Banks, who's asked the Minister for Defence in writing on 20th of June 2006 the following. 1. How many A. Australian Defence Force and B. Defence civilian personnel are currently stationed or employed at the Swan Island training area? how many other Australian government or other personnel are currently stationed or employed at the Swan Island training area. Number 3, what Australian Defence Force training activities are carried out at the Swan Island training area? 4, since March 1996, have any federal or state members of Parliament A, visited the Swan Island Training Centre, or B, received classified briefings on activities undertaken at Swan Island? If so, which members and when did the visits and briefings take place? Dr. Nelson Bradfield, Minister for Defence, he answers the honourable member's questions as follows. In reference to question 1, parts A, B and question 2, Defence maintains appropriate records in relation to personnel stationed or employed at the Swan Island training area. For security reasons, it would be inappropriate to divulge these figures. In other words, we'll just have to take their word for it. They might have the records, they mightn't. In response to question 3, Swan Island is a military exercise area. It provides a venue for naval training in the use of radar flares, facilities for Army Reserve training, and a small demolitions range for Army use. While Defence maintains appropriate records, there we go with the appropriate records again, so as to who maintains them exactly and how accurate they are, well, that's anyone's guess. In relation to its training exercises at this facility, some activities are classified. That'd be all of them. In relation to questions 4, part A and B, specific details concerning visits to Swan Island training area and classified briefings provided to visitors or activities are not appropriate for disclosure. Mind you, bear in mind that this is the head of Army being asked questions by a senator of our elected government. In actual fact, he's required to answer the questions. Interestingly, what have we got for time? A little bit of time, we've got a minute or so before we cut to a section I've got lined up on terrains. It's a bit of an interesting watch and a read. They're the bits of equipment that are used to bore the tunnels beneath these military bases, and it also connects them together. We're going to do quite a bit on them as we go forward. But here's some figures. The taxpayer paid Hewlett Packard Australia $493,830 in 2009 for an Anchor Node server and software. 2004, we paid $833,157 to Securitech Risk Management to provide security at Swan Island, to provide fucking security on RA4 base, the SAS's home turf. What, they can't provide the fucking security themselves? You got to be joking. So you got two bobbers in there with access, I assume, to God knows what, national secrets. So we can trust the two bobbers from Securitech, probably a Paki mob, Indian fucking outsourced lot. We can trust them, but we can't trust our elected senators, much less our citizens. It's utter bullshit. That's from me to you, General, whatever your fucking name is. There are elements of what you guys do that I'll grant needs to remain secret, particularly that which is operational currently, not the shit that's happened 20 fucking years ago, and how much shit costs and where you're spending it and what records are being kept by whom and who has access to what. These are things that we're entitled to know, and at some point in the future, you bet my words, we will know. So here we paid this Securitech mob another $110,000, 2001. Security services of Checkpoint 1, Well, that's just for checkpoint 1. How many fucking checkpoints you got? $110,000 each one. Blokes are off your heads, honestly. You wonder where the money goes. Here we've paid this AGOWA mob, whoever they are, $774,900 for a new shitter. An upgrade to their shitters. You got fucking bidets in there, have you? Unbelievable. Anyway, as I say, the whole miserable truth about the shit for Bitten Island is on the site for everyone to see. In addition to some of the shenanigans that these blokes are getting up to in the Australian name, insofar as spying on African countries and meddling with foreign governments, much like the CIA does. So you can expect that much the same that's happening to America at the moment will start happening to Australia unless we start to remove ourselves from this from this nexus of evil that I'd call the UN and its conspirators. Alrighty, as I said, we've got a section here on subterranean boring machines, apparatus for boring large tunnels in hard rock and other surfaces. There's quite a bit of kit, so have a look at it and jump on the site, and there's a couple of articles there in relation to it. Please post your comments, let me know what you think. If you have any more information about it, I'd love to see it, hear it, watch it. Okay, here we go. Once again, of course, don't forget to like our videos, check us out on YouTube if you're not already there, or on our website netgazette.com.au or netgazette.com. All our videos, whether they're available on YouTube or not, whether YouTube has restricted them in some countries or outright removed them, makes no difference. They're all hosted in our private cloud server and available on the website. So if there's one there that fails to play, jump over to the website and you'll be able to play it from there. There's also a bunch of other great stuff and content on the site. We're streaming high definition movies there also now for members, so check that out too. Alright, here we go. Let's have a look at these terrains, eh?
Loading complete.
back in June 11th, 1972, in the LA Times, the lead physicist for the RAND Corporation, he said that in 1972 the government had the technology to excavate tunnels across the United States and put maglev trains in that were capable of doing 10 to 14,000 miles an hour. Now, this is not science fiction. We have the capability to do it. These are U.S. patents by Los Alamos National Laboratories talking about thermonuclear boring machines that melt through rock just like you're taking a knife through butter. I went to Bechtel in Las Vegas, Nevada, and put in Subterrene, which is what they called one of these, a Subterrene, into their computer system. These are images of the Subterrene being tested up at Los Alamos Scientific Laboratories. The actual boring tips get superheated and they melt through solid rock. There's no excavation of materials that are needed. The rock penetrates, cracks, and presses liquid molten glass up through a lining all the way around it. In the early 1970s, there are plans for a network of underground tube shuttles. There are tube shuttle systems leading out of the base.
So we have these tunnels under the United States now. You're saying this is a reality?
Absolutely.
Explosion du... Même pas 2 minutes, même pas 1 minute là. Explosion.
Sweet surrender on the quayside. You remember we used to run in the shadow of the cargoes. I take you one time. We're counting all the numbers down to the waterline. When near misses on the dog-leaf stairway, friends' kisses in the darkened doorway.
Alright, welcome back.
Blowing out a wild and cold.
Okay, well, I hope everyone enjoyed the introduction to underground tunnels and secret military bases. I had planned to go on further with this episode, however, obviously as everyone realises, we've had the events in France,
Up comes a coaster, fast and
specifically Paris, take place, as I've been
over my
recording
shoulder. Oh, you can see her.
processing this episode, so I'm going to wrap it up here,
No
folks.
money in our jackets and our jeans at all.
I do want to, just before I do wrap it up though, don't panic, it's not the Bible. Well, it is my Bible, it's Julian the Scene story. I do just want to read one quote here, or one paragraph. Whatever the future brings for Assange and his organisation, WikiLeaks, WikiLeaks has provided a new way to achieve better journalism by challenging powerful institutions, be they governments or corporations. There will be difficult issues, as always, over what to publish and what to keep secret. But the old journalistic maxim, publish and be damned, a phrase first used by the Duke of Wellington to dismiss a blackmail attempt nearly 200 years ago, seems to capture the feeling of the moment. WikiLeaks and Julian Assange have delivered to journalism an old-fashioned idea of real journalism is simply the disclosure of whatever powerful vested interests wish to keep secret. So, book by Andrew Fowler, tracing the journey that Julian Assange took from initially developing the idea for WikiLeaks and then making it a reality, and then the subsequent hunting of him by the US justice system and military complex and industrial complex and Bilderbergs and pretty much everyone in the Western security services that's got anything to do with them. He's the type of person we need to model our leaders on. Well educated, cautious, but a true believer in education is the key to bringing about understanding, which is obviously the key to all of us being able to get along harmoniously. Alright, enough yep. Going to close this one up now. We're going to do a special episode. Episode 9 is all about the French false flag attacks. I think we know enough about them at this point to pretty much say that it is likely not a random terrorist event, although all things are of course possible. But we'll get right into that next episode. So until then, folks, stay safe, look after one another and prepare. Till next episode. Soon, I hope.